Okay, here's one Home Team History did. He says the 5 things you need to know about African history before you watch Black Panther! Exclamation mark. So this indicates that black people have to watch his video before they just don't understand the comic book story. Let's continue here and see what he has to say about it as we go, and I'll try not to cut into it a bunch. I haven't watched this before. Usually a lot of times I'll watch a lot of it before, so I'll have an idea of what's coming up, but we're just going to wing it. Let's go.
The highly anticipated Marvel movie centered around an African superhero is making a lot of noise within the African diaspora. People are absolutely excited about how Hollywood is going to tell a story about legendary Wakanda and Black Panther. Everyone is brushing up on the Black Panther story.
I have to pause right there. There is no legendary story of Wakanda. It's a comic book made up Negro hero that blacks could look up to in comic book world that was made by a Jewish man named Stan Lee that made a lot of the things everybody really knows well. There's no actual legend of Wakanda.
And taking all their comic book prerequisites in order to fully understand the movie and dive right in. Though understandable, everyone's excitement is missing one crucial element.
Oh no.
Black Panther is obviously going to incorporate African elements and culture throughout the movie. It's clear through the multiple trailers themselves.
Right.
In order to appreciate fully and respect this African fantasy, we must first understand and respect the African culture it borrows from.
Oh no. So to respect a comic book fantasy. Now let me make this correct. To respect a comic book fantasy, you'd have to know about black history. Funny how pamphlets like this didn't come out for Superman or Spider-Man or Thor or anything else, but black people apparently need some guidance because they might freak out and think that it really has some basis on fact or something, I guess, and he wants to make sure that doesn't happen by slowly revealing the truth to him. Here I'm hoping. Let's continue. Ooh. Why does he always show this real pale black person with red hair?
What up, African world? It's your boy Home Team here. I'm back at it with another video of African history, culture, and worldview. And remember, you can support the Home Team on Patreon to gain full access to exclusive videos, full history courses, and all sources. Just click the link on the description box below.
But you may not want to do that because he's going to lie and deceive to you somewhat, but not near as bad as all the people that says we were Egyptians and all that crap. But he tries to, mislead people like here. Course 15, Timbuktu under Songhay conclusion. Oh, well, it was under Songhay, but who were they under and who helped run them? And then hold on, what about Queen Tenhanan that founded Mali all the way back at the start, and then the Arabics coming in and forming it, and it really had nothing to do with Negroids, although they try to say it was a Negroid society. So we have this definite disconnect from what would be mine or something that I was involved with. Mine is actually something their people came up with, and something they were involved with was something they were involved with that was some other people's thing that goes on. Let's continue.
Anyway, today we're going to talk about the 5 things you need to know about African history before watching Marvel's Black Panther. Now, there's a lot.
Oh, well, first we could just look at the map that he shows here. And not to just sound racist and hellish about this whole thing, but this is a map of people that went around on boats and were able to cartograph the world. All these maps were made by Caucasians. They were the ones that investigated, went all around the world and did all the things in the exploration. Blacks weren't really involved with that. In fact, they didn't have a seaworthy boat that anybody can ever find recollection of. Somebody said somebody over here after 2000 AD started to have some because of the Zanj connection with Negroid slaves from over here in the Horn, and that was the very first one possibly. In this map here, we find that Guinea in this area here has already been taken over by the Islamic slave trade, definitely, and so they're feeding off of here up into this area, which it says inferior, right there, anterior, inferior, and wow, that's terrible, but it also says Negroland. And so, what about this area up here? Well, that's the desert that it says there, but everything above that all was endemic Caucasians forever. So is it over here. There's no boundary. And all of Egypt, too, was all primordial Caucasians all the way around the whole area here. And if you look up the definition, it'll even tell you Caucasians were through the Horn of Africa until a recent form after the Bantu expansion, which came out of this area. Now, let's continue.
A lot of visual aspects in the Black Panther trailer that obviously borrows from African culture. And if we get a better understanding of it, we can allow the agency of African people to illuminate further in all the excitement.
Or you could realize that all this is fancy New Age costuming and stuff, and it really had nothing to do with elder black culture whatsoever. This isn't the way that they had it, and they didn't have advanced metal swords or anything, not giant spears, didn't dress like this in any way either. And if they did now, it would be in Caucasian clothing, except for this man here, and Whitaker. And I like his acting style and stuff. He does a good job. A lot of people don't like him. They say things like, oh, he's got a droopy eye and this, that, and the other. No, it makes him real. It makes him real, and whenever he acts, you can feel it. And that's all that really matters in acting. And there are some great black actors in this movie and a lot of other movies. But let's continue.
Now, there are several aspects to the Black Panther story that can be seen throughout African history in general, especially when it comes to the continent harboring some of the planet's most valuable resources. Once we understand the cultural African visuals throughout the movie, we will definitely view it from a completely different perspective, and some may even appreciate it more.
Yet, blacks really, just be honest, didn't know about the gold that was all below them and the diamonds and stuff. In fact, the story of that actually is kind of odd, where the man was there and realizing kids were playing around with this fist-sized diamond, and there's a whole bunch of them all over the place, and they didn't care anything about it. They had no idea the white man would pay a lot of money for that. It was really nothing for them. It meant nothing to them. And so they weren't really doing anything with their resources. But yet, worse than that, if we were to really look at a true through rationale, there is no vibranium or anything that happens and some super special stuff. It really was an odd thing whenever they tried to incorporate the fact that the super metal that all the super friends use somehow came from negroids. This is trying to be a modern day cuckold where you say, oh, well, it came from black people. And of course, nothing came from black people really, and not religion or not anything, although he'll touch upon that here shortly. Let's continue.
That's essentially the point of this list. Now let's begin. The first thing we need to know is about scarification and face painting. One of the clearest representations of African culture in the trailer is the presence of scarification and face paint. Many African ethnic groups throughout the continent practice both of these cultural elements. And it's also important to understand that there are many Africans who do not. The inclusion of scarification and face paint is obvious.
Now, you see it throughout the movie and stuff. Black people didn't used to be near this light. That's all an admix type thing. Khoisaners seem somewhat lighter, and there are some that, of course, aren't extremely dark, like you see a lot of Nilotics and things. But due to this fact, and of course, they never developed tattooing and things. Tattooing is Caucasians, like you see in Egypt. Egyptians are extremely tattooed, these Caucasian Egyptians that blacks want to deny. And then, of course, the Libyans, and you can even see that in the art and things like that. And tattooing seems to run up through the Middle East and actually go to Proto-Indo-Europeans that predate everything that we actually have as what we call recorded history. And yet, those bodies at that time have symbolic tattoos all over their body, and those tattoos relegate things that happened in their lives and stuff. When I used to play Dungeons and Dragons, they had created a ideal of a person called a thrall warrior, and this thrall warrior had tattoos all over his body, and even if he was beheaded and you found him, you could look at him and read his body and tell who he was, where he came from, his family lineage, his hometown, things that had happened during his life, and read it almost like a book. So that's a little bit different than just scarification and things like that. That's a little bit different of an aspect, but let's continue to go here.
Scarification and face paint are kind of like the Western world's poster child image of African culture and exotification in general. So in essence, it
Not
wasn't
really.
enough just to include black people in Africa. They had to make them exotic as well to indicate the uniqueness or ancientness, if you will, for Wakanda.
Yeah, to try to give it that ancient feel, or to give it that feel that you would probably notice as, containing all the elements. And they didn't want to do this lacking in any way. They definitely wanted to do it to give a sense of black pride or something in something. But, it kind of backfired a little bit weirdly that blacks started hopping around and saying they were all these things off of a comic book movie. You didn't see people come out of Thor and start running around acting like fools, really, and any other superhero movie. But then again, I guess it was because those were all Caucasian superhero movies. And as soon as a black one hit, oh my God. And you wouldn't believe all the videos that are out there. It's crazy, crazy. I've done a couple of comments on one and now I'm doing another. And I think that's about disgustingly it. Unless somebody says something rampantly stupid that I just can't keep from making a video about. But let's continue.
Even though there are many Africans who participate in scarification, some of the most complex scarification patterns are found in the Congo Basin. The patterns from the Congo Basin seem to be one of the main influences for Marvel's Black Panther. Among the Luba, scarification and hairstyling are used by both sexes as ways to encode memory about a person's history and their place in society. As the memory grows with age, more information is added. The word Kulan.
There's no real information on any of this scarification. There's lines and patterns, and they don't add any information or anything. This is something that he tries to relegate to like all black people, but there is a group of people that occasionally will put another star upon their body due to things going on, or if they move up in rank or something extravagant happens. Do all the other ones do it? No, no, not at all. In fact, it never looks like this that you see here. It looks more like the girl who had scars all over her face and things. Yeah, and I don't think anybody wants to try to do that today. So it shows you that once given the opportunity for blacks to see how everybody else in the world really reacted, they don't want to do that anymore. I think this is one of the key reasons that they keep trying to say that they were Egyptians or Hebrews or anything else than West African primitives, because in seeing it and seeing it in comparison to the rest of the world, they're embarrassed for themselves and don't like it and want to try to distance themselves from it as far as possible in the fact of them being primitives. And hey, man, it's not going to change. It's never going to change. But maybe we'll just all forget about it. Well, not whenever things like this keep happening. Let's continue.
Which is associated with scarification and used by some ethnic groups in the region, has later been adopted to mean to right. Because for many African cultures, your history is not some ambiguous thing that happened in the past. Your history is literally a part of who you are, and thus, Kulemba simply writes it on your body in the artistic fashion that it does. Another cultural element readily available for us in the trail.
And I guess I'd have to say something about that last thing on scarification there. Yeah, the history. Blacks in America don't want that history whatsoever. They want a white history. They want to say they came from the Bible somehow. Hamites. Well, Ham wasn't even cursed. It was Canaan, and we know Canaanites and the Phoenicians were. Oh yeah. Well, still there was one. Okay. Well, there was one black in the Bible. Is that what you're going to go with? And who would it marry? And how would that make a mulatto? And go from there. And no, no one ever said that was ever a Negro. It's Negroes trying to put themselves into that Bible that they're not a part of. You see, India has a religion, and they do too, and I think he'll touch upon it slightly, but not much, because it generally involves witch doctors and all this type of stuff. And I mean, we'd have to go back 40,000 years to try to compare it to something that Caucasians were really doing. I show that in a lot of my videos, but that's really not really as evident as what he tries to show here. And he's trying to give some sense of pride, but at the same time, blacks are trying to reject this all at the same time and say that they were the Caucasian Egyptians and so on. You see her here with this huge amount of hair on her head, which doesn't exist in Negroids, up in a giant hair hat. And the only way you'd get that hair on a Negroid whatsoever is for them to be highly admixed, or for them to wear a Caucasian mimicking hair hat like they currently do now, where you see a lot of them wearing blondes and things, even colored contacts. They bleach themselves, all types of things, and it kind of shows you um, part of the problems in the black culture in neighborhoods. Let's continue.
For Marvel's Black Panther is face paint. Face painting for many African societies can be sort of a moniker for status. conveying a strong cultural message. But many times it's simply celebratory, especially amongst the Fulani, one of the largest ethnic groups in West Africa. Face paint is an indication of beauty, creativity, and some may even say intelligence. The purpose of face paint is ultimately to arise an emotion that is unique to the viewer. Amongst a subgroup of the Fulani called the Wudab, men paint their faces in a very elaborate manner for the sole purpose of attracting a woman, arising an emotion and feeling that is unique only to her.
And you'll see that and a lot more depictions other than that where they have this straight yellow face, and it's kind of comical to watch but also very extremely interesting. It's almost like a bird of paradise thing. They flash their eyes and cheer their mouth and look all around, and it's a weird expression, but they're trying to do this to attract a woman. It's an odd state whenever we watch it because, of course, in the man world, in humans, women get to be pretty and they're enticing the men, right? But if you look into like the bird world, bird men are pretty and the females are rather drab and so on. This might also lead to some concept of ideas on the idea of women and hierarchy and things like that that come later, especially whenever you see these bird cults that come out of things like this, and maybe following the natural order of the world, things came to that, because before there was definitely a lot more matriarchal societies and so on. And what they show here is thick eyebrows, helping to draw them in, lots of makeup, smoothing the faces and looking so nice. Alkaline noses of admixed negroids wearing a fake, which you can even tell kind of tucked in, looks like Bantu knot, trying to show, no, we're not going to do the Caucasian mimicking hair hat in here. And in fact, one of the scenes is incredibly funny. When she gets into a fight with a guy, she takes and grabs off her wig and throws it at the guy. I'm sure black people get a huge hoot out of that. Let's continue.
Next, we have African spirituality. Now, we can safely assume that Marvel's Black Panther will incorporate some spiritual aspects of African culture in the film. Whether the inclusion has to do with African worldview in general, religion, or even simply African proverbs dealing with matters of the heart or the human spirit. When it comes to African spirituality, it's very diverse. Africans do not.
I'm not sure why he chose during the TARP about talking about African spirituality. He shows the Caucasian Egyptians, people of Punt, and things along that line. These are all Caucasians, and you can clearly see it. So it almost makes no sense why he would use that trying to refer to African. Oh, well, yeah, Egypt was in Africa, but it wasn't Negroids. Neither was all of North Africa. We talk about sub-Saharans, and if we did, we wouldn't be showing wall pictures like this. You'd be showing a witch doctor doing this crazy little stuff and playing with bones and things, making cannibalistic potions and things along that line. Let's not lie about the way things were, and why would you show this picture when you're talking about that? I think that's very misleading. This is part of what I tell you, that he tries to be more correct, but yet he still is extremely misleading.
Not at all have the same exact view when it comes to religion or spirituality, but there does seem to be a very common theme when it comes to African spirituality in general, and it's this: the complete veneration and respect for the people that came before them. Not only do many African cultures venerate their ancestors, some even elevate them to the level of a deity. The Black Panther title itself within the Wakanda world is something that's inherited and to be respected. T'Challa's role as Black Panther is to look out for the needs and concerns of his people in totality and protect.
And that's kind of like a king. And that's kind of like what's in Caucasian stuff. And of course, I don't know if you know who wrote the screenplay for this, but it wasn't black people. And who came up with the original concept, it wasn't black people. So they're going to give them this type of thing, and that's fantastic. And Black Panthers looked up something for black people to look up to, or to be some type of leader warrior type situation and stuff. The great Zulu warrior, if you will. Well, that's fantastic. But let's not turn it into a racist problem here off just trying to give yourself some pride. There's where the problem ensues. Let's continue.
What his ancestors built at all costs. This cultural value within Wakanda is a direct result of ancestor veneration within Africa and
And ancestor veneration, by the way, is something that's been going on in Caucasian history since forever. It really isn't an element in Negroid theology. They don't keep up with it past a few generations, so there's nobody great. Now, truthfully, Caucasians hold mentally three generations: them, their parents, and their grandparents, and usually don't even have a recollection of their grandparents, but they hear stories about them. And then there's ancestor veneration of things that may have happened in the past, and so on, like this. This also led to being great men telling stories of old and all this type of stuff. And Caucasians have an extremely rich history of all this type of stuff. Black people never really kept up with it. They also didn't have writing to put anything down in any way, shape, or form, and didn't seem to have any need or want to till they saw everybody else doing it and what they had. And let's just continue.
Reflection of a ubiquitous African spiritual ideology. The important thing to know about African spirituality that sets it apart from the Western world is that it's not a closed theological system like in some forms of Christianity or Islam. Africans have different ideas on what the role the ancestors play in the lives of living descendants. Some Africans believe that
Well, they feel that that's unique in any way. No, the saints that people still believe in and do things, and that's under that single eyes theology. See, because what that does is that takes that whole 12 gods that ran everything, and instead it turns it into one. But then there are angels that are helping, and then there are saints that help do things, and really we end up with more than 12 in the first place. And but it's all under one God. See, well, yeah, well, it's all under Zeus. Well, it's all under this, it's all under that, so it's a different type of thing. But we aren't going to try to pretend that that makes it all brand new or anything like that, or unique and somehow different than the Western world. For the Western world had all of these types of religions, monotheism through. And I don't think he's trying to portray Negroid theology as being anything to do with the Bible or monotheism at this point. But let's continue.
the ancestors are equal in power to deities, while others believe they are not. The defining line between deities and ancestors is often contested, but overall, ancestors are believed to occupy a higher level of existence than living human beings and are believed to be able to bestow blessings and guidance. Wakanda's version.
That sounds quite familiar to Caucasian religions and so on too. So I don't see any real uniqueness, and I'm wondering if the day before they ever met Caucasians, if they had that idea too. But let's continue.
Of ancestral worship seems to take more from the role of ancestral guidance and veneration rather than deistic qualities. The men that came before Chakala greatly defined the holistic identity of Black Panther itself. In other words, the ancestors define what Black Panther is and what it means to be a leader.
No, Stanley, Jewish Caucasian man, he defined what made up Chitala and his backstory. The man made some incredible backstories, you know, from envenomating from radioactive spiders to just all kinds of experiments and things that were tried to be done, 1,001 different ones and stuff. And so it doesn't have this big, deep meaning to black people because it's all a made-up history. Let's continue.
The message of this particular African spiritual understanding is that the moral code inherited from the ancestors is the truest conqueror of all, and abiding by it will give you total victory. We see this form of spiritualism exhibited in African history with the kings of Kush, when King Pi conquered Egypt for the sole purposes of spiritual reformation and forgave his enemies rather than ravage the region.
Oh, that's kind of an odd way to look at it. When you really dig into Egyptian history and what had happened there, it actually seems like they were trying to get with people that were in the Asiatic form and try to take over Egypt in a secondary type of way. And of course, they weren't the Egyptians in any way, but they were under them in somewhat and adopted a lot of their stuff that they had going on. So kind of an odd twist there on what he may be trying to present. But then also, Kush was not Negroids. Oh, amazing. Kush was Caucasians. While they did use a lot of Nubians and stuff in their fight that they did, and so it's always looked at as being that, they aren't a Negroid whenever you look at the statues of that. And in your Bible it tells you they're Ethiopian and so on. Well, if you'll look up the definition of Ethiopian, it will show you that it shows a bunch of brown splotches all over the known world at that time, and not really Ethiopia, even where we have now. And of course, it used to be called Abyssinia, so that's a different thing too. And Caucasians all over North Africa, through Egypt, and through the Horn of Africa. But let's just go with what he's got going here and how he's trying to him West Africans into somehow having this Cushite type of religion.
The Kushites felt compelled and that the moral code their ancestors gave them was being corrupted. Thus, they had to realign things back in spiritual order. They believed...
No. No. This wasn't that they felt like Egypt was drifting out in left field and they had to correct anything in any way, shape, or form. This is not what it was in any way, shape, or form, and you're not going to twist it to try to sound like that. There was no Kushites came up and straightened out the Egyptians or anything. Please don't try to put that pathetic crap in your videos.
It was their moral duty to uplift and advance a higher moral standard, even in the face of danger. In more ways than one, we conquer you through our morality. And Wakanda borrows from this African spiritual understanding.
Yeah, you conquer nobody through your morality. Your morality is the weakest of people that we can find on the planet, with what you're willing to accept and do and be delusional and gullible and things like that. But worse than that, you started off this scene here by describing how these people took over and were all in a respectful way. But again, when you look into it, they actually took the ruler there and burnt him alive. Oh yeah, you can't avoid the truth whenever you try to yap, but you don't know. And the reality is they burnt that man alive, and it was looked as disgusting by everybody involved, except for the people that did it. Let's continue with what he might have to say now.
The next thing we need to know about African history is centered around technological advancement.
Oh boy.
Wakanda is largely based on Bantu civilization and social structure. It's actually pretty obvious, especially with a name like Wakanda. The location of Wakanda has varied over time, but it's more consistently located around southeastern Africa. We all know that Wakanda is praised for being technologically advanced. Now, some of you might be thinking, what's so special about the technology in this region of Africa? Well, the greatest stone structures built south of the Sahara is not in West Africa. It's in southern Africa, in modern-day Zimbabwe. The architecture exhibited by the Shona people has not been duplicated by any other people in the region. So, what's so special about this?
The local Shona people tell you that this was built not by Negroids, but by Caucasians that had come. And no Negroids have ever built any stone structures that have any resemblance to this whatsoever, until much, much later, and when I only assisted. Therefore, you cannot claim this great Zimbabwe as being a Negroid thing, and please do not attempt to let West Africans think that they had something to do with Great Zimbabwe, for that would be a foolish lie again. Let's continue.
Stone city of the Shona people in southern Africa. Well, Great Zimbabwe was really architecturally advanced because they built their stone city without mortar, which is a very impressive feat. The region is so impressive that early travelers to the region didn't even think Africans built it.
In fact, they knew they didn't, because they asked the Shona what happened, and they said it was white people like you that came and built this place. They just moved into the area. Nowadays, people have talked to them enough and said, no, you claim it, no, you claim it. Come on, black men, claim it. Lie. And so now they're trying to lie, but there is a lot. You can look this up. Definitely. They'll show you. There's a video that shows you the tribal elder telling you this exact same thing. Also, in Ethiopia, same exact situation. Angels came and built all this by night. What? Yeah, it didn't have anything to do with the current people there, and they don't do big stonework. Can anybody breathe in and out, look around, and go, uh-huh? Thank you.
Great Zimbabwe is a World Heritage Site and is recognized today as the largest ancient stone structures below the Sahara. Very Wakanda.
Is it me, or is Black Panther just a plain old Batman ripoff? Let's continue.
Like, if you will. Next, we have African mask and sculpture. The trailer for Black Panther reveals the inclusion and use of African mask. African masks are again seen as another archetype of African culture and a convenient way to express the exotic and unique nature of the Black Panther hero. African masks are very diverse, and they're largely seen in parts of West, Central, and Southern Africa. African masks in the Western world have largely been associated with primitivism, but ironically, these masks have influenced European and Western art like Cubism, Fauvism, and Expressionism.
No, they want to try to claim that it somehow it influenced our art. And whenever Impressionism started with that blotchy look, that if you're up close to it, and how when you're real close to it, it just looks like blotches, and you get far away and it turns into a picture. And they want to claim the fact that they didn't do very good art to that. And that's not a truth and reality, for when you step away, it doesn't turn into a good picture. And that makes the difference of the two. They didn't influence us. The influence that has been rebounded is pretty much gone 99% towards Negroids, who now worship a Caucasian God in a Caucasian Bible and do everything that is non-West African primitive. They didn't have an advancement. They didn't have any technology, which is strange that it even has a section on it. But yeah, they most of them, not all, were pre-Stone Age level people, illiterates, and they didn't have any cattle or any domesticated animals whatsoever until they were brought to them with trade. All those cattle, all that grain comes from others, and they weren't black. Let's continue.
The African mask usually has a spiritual or religious meaning, and they are largely used at social events. Though the meaning of African mask can vary, in most traditional African cultures, the person who wears the mask loses their human identity and turns into the spirit represented by the mask itself.
Yeah, this is common. Witch doctor rituals and things like that and stuff. It kind of works that way, even into Catholicism, where the sacred priest turns himself into somebody who can turn that biscuit into the form of Jesus and so on off of it. So it still goes from there. But whenever people used to don a mask and then they act different and stuff when they wear the mask, this is just like an actor of today doing the same type of thing and pulling off a role. And whenever ancient shamans and witch doctors did it in Caucasian or Negroid society, they would take on this entity's persona. And then, of course, after, take the mask off, and you would be back to who you were. And you, of course, wouldn't act like the idiot from before. This is just common sense. Let's continue.
In other words, by putting on the mask, you become a superhuman agent, not bound by the limits of the human dimension. In many ways, the Black Panther costume can be seen as a mask, as T'Challa puts on the spirit of his ancestors as they gave him the power to achieve superhuman feats. Also,
you couldn't breathe in that thing if you had to. Let me back it up just a touch. You couldn't breathe in that thing if you had to. I don't care how much cool engineering Caucasians got to and tried to vent it and do all kinds of stuff. I guarantee you he didn't stay in that thing more than a couple of scenes, and it would pop it up and he would breathe a whole lot. Pop it down, make sure it's right, go into a scene, come back out, and they would try not to be winded or overheated in any way before they went into that scene. I can guarantee that. Let's continue.
The sense of high civilization in Africa was presented through the sculptures of the Benin Empire, which single-handedly changed the view of African people in general throughout the world.
Well, yeah, kind of. And really the weird thing there is that they never had a copper or a bronze age and then pulled off those masks. So everybody knows it was from outside influence. The only ones who won't mention that or try to even put it in their thoughts are blacks who are trying to say it was all them that did all these things. And now we're reduced down to primitives that have maybe made a mask one time, but they sure aren't in the Bible or in Egypt and so on. But let's continue.
And last but not least, the one thing we must know about African history before watching Black Panther is a brief history on African military. The trailer for Black Panther very clearly shows battle scenes and African fighting styles and weaponry and such. The Western world rarely associates genius with any African military throughout history.
Oh, they've never shown genius or prowess pretty much anywhere off of it. And even the big groups like Zulu tribes and stuff that got together don't exist today. Any civilization they try to mention that had done something is now ruins now. And so nothing ever really came from it or so. And a lot of the fighting styles they show have nothing to do with Negroid fighting styles whatsoever. It's just going to be looked at that way by black people, of course. And this fighting styles was brought to them by other people. Let's continue.
African empires collectively thwarted many attempts from outside Asians. For example, the Mali Empire versus the Portuguese when Mandinka defeated the Portuguese when they raided the coastline attempting to enslave the inhabitants. Also, the Kushites of ancient Nubia, who maintained their independence against the Assyrians, Persians, and Romans. These nations and empires didn't fall from the outside, but from within.
And so now we can see the problem inherent in black civilizations. But what we're looking at here is Negroids and Kushites fighting, and there's a Caucasian and there's a black man. And somebody's wearing skins still and not very advanced, and the other guys are more advanced but having a bit of a trouble here. And in the background you see the Caucasian Egyptian statues, and so what it really pertains to and who it did and did not include. And blacks were all taken over pretty much by Caucasians in one form or another during this history that we've had with them, which is a somewhat recent history. In the ancient history, nobody knew they existed. You look at ancient Herodotus's maps, they never describe them or even show that sub-Saharan Africa exists. And by that same token, sub-Saharan Africans did not know Egypt or the rest of the world existed. And to try to change that and say that it was different is really racist, pathetic, and wrong. Let's continue.
From other African enemies. But when it comes to genius coming from the African continent, we only use that word for two men, Hannibal and Shaka.
And Hannibal was a Caucasian, and Shaka was a Zulu leader that pulled a bunch of tribes together in a bad way, by the way. It wasn't all like, hey, I ran through like Peter Cottontail and Candy. No. And he whipped everybody together and made them fight a fight, and then poof, and we know what happens at the end of that. So, and Hannibal is, again, I will say it again, not a black person, Carthaginian, endemic North African, Caucasian, just like it always shows. Thank you.
So Wakanda's Black Panther is associated with Bantu society. We're going to go with Shaka and the Zulu. Some scholars proclaim that Shaka single-handedly...
Hold on. Did he just say that he could, in black history, go with Hannibal? And that he chose to go with Bantu because Shaka is more like the movie? Or did he really need to say, well, one of those is Caucasian, the other one's black, so we can't use that one. So really the only great one that ever came out that anybody ever hears anything about is this Shaka Zulu guy. Let's continue.
Is the nature of warfare in southern Africa with his innovation. Shaka's innovations such as the Ikawa, an updated, more advanced thrusting spear, and the buffalo horns formation has received world-renowned respect, just like how Wakanda gained its worldwide admiration for its innovation.
Any formation that a Caucasian would have gone into going against that easily became superior, and they can easily be overthrown. Having a slightly longer spear now and things after interaction with other people that did have these and seeing the advantage of it is not really a big boon to go crazy over like he acts. And then again, what has the spear got to do with a rifle? And so that kind of ends there in these advanced Caucasians, where now I hear they can fly and went into space, and people in Africa are still like your picture that you see here, except for in the westernized areas, which shows you what they're doing as opposed to what they were doing. Let's continue.
One scholar named John Gutman writes of Shaka and the Zulu, and I quote, "Combined with Shaka's buffalo horns attack formation for surrounding and annihilating enemy forces, the Zulu combination of Ikawa and shield, similar to the Roman legionaries' use of gladius and scutum, was devastating."
So what they did was a flanking maneuver. Oh, that's amazing. I've never heard of that before. And then now he says, oh, their stuff wasn't unique. It's just like these other people. Let's continue.
At the time of Shaka's assassination in 1828, it had made the Zulu kingdom the greatest power in southern Africa and a force to be reckoned with.
And yet, if you look at this picture, and you know that in that same year that this was going on, there were railroads and railways, and thousands of years before this, Greek colosseums and all the temples, incredible things through Europe, Sumeria that we know of nowadays, all the way back to Göbekli Tepe. And yet these people look about as advanced as the Amerindians or less. And their big boon to history was making a sharper knife and having a few victories against somebody. Let's continue.
Even against Britain's modern army in 1879. In essence, military genius, respect, and world recognition is something not exclusive to Wakanda, but can be attributed to real African history.
Wakanda doesn't get any world-renowned respect for its military prowess. It's a cartoon comic book. Just about like most of black people's history they try to make up. Now, he's put a lot of real information in here, but you'd have to pick it apart and with the lies and misassociation to really get through with it. And again, now he shows somebody paler than me, an Irishman, as being a black person with red hair on, that this is the standard, not a tar black negroid, that was what it would be without admix. And so we can see this blatant exaggeration and the Egyptian eyes trying to be thrown on there. Yeah, you gotta love that. Let's continue.
And Wakanda complements this. Well, I'm all out, guys. If you want access to exclusive African history videos, full courses, sources to this video, or simply want to support the home team, you can support the home team on patreon.com.
Yeah, and so he calls out for money from blacks. And, you know, the one weird thing that I can't fathom, but I can't say against, is that he does a lot better of a presentation than most blacks do on this environment. He doesn't get all mad, but he talks real slow, like he's on Smooth Jazz 105. He fits in a bunch of lies, though, still. But at least he is so incredibly closer to the truth than a lot of what's being passed around, to where I feel weird saying that you should maybe look at his videos versus these other idiots. But I don't want you to come out of this with only 3 lies instead of 5. That doesn't seem to be that much better. If I smile to you and I talk slowly like this while I lie to you, does that make you feel better? No, really, unless we step back and quit making up foolish lies, this is all looked as being something that's somewhat pathetic. If we took out all the BS of the Egyptians and Hebrews and everything and left just home team history, now we'd be able to easily pick that apart in certain phrases that he uses, like he did through the video that I did myself. And so that's about it, guys. Like he says, I'm out. And so onward. I felt like doing this, and it really was a lackluster thing, but I somehow felt with Wakanda he was going to try to put a few things together that don't exist, like Egypt and other things, and he did try to do it. And then he tried to say Hannibal was black, and then all these other things, and that somehow Shaka Zulu was as good as Romans and all these other things. Oh, did they catch people off guard? Sure. Did that happen in 82? Sure. You want to try it again? Probably not. So let's quit acting like that's some big because it really wasn't. And it still isn't. And the lies need to end before one group of people gets to progress, for they feel like they're progressing, but all it is wearing new clothes and hating white people. Peace.